When Queen Elizabeth left, she took the happiness with her. As another American presidential race begins, I find myself missing the Queen, who was the last of a dying breed, royal or otherwise, and a monument to what we used to call class without fear of offense. Elizabeth's departure from her mortal coil has left a void. The upside is that it distracts from hating everyone in the American presidential queue. While I don't really hate anyone, if you stay in journalism long enough, you discover one day that there's no one left to like. This will be my 12th presidential race, which sounds to me a small number, given the degree of my malaise. The similarities between our nation of migrant mutts, speaking of my own ancestors, who fought to extract themselves from monarchical control, and the descendants of that same monarchy, have amounted to approximately zero, until now. Without Elizabeth, the royals are at least as common as the rest of us, and further proof that privilege does not endow happiness. King Charles and his mirthless seedling Harry have this non-royalist fixated as never before. Throughout the latter years of the Queen's reign, I sometimes wondered why she wouldn't step down and allow her eldest son to assume the throne before he, too, grew old. Alas, Elizabeth knew what she was doing. She knew her own son well enough and wasn't letting go of that crown. How sad she must have been to realize that her embarrassing brood would inherit and sadden the kingdom. Exceptions among the younger generations are the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Kate, and their 3 children, who seem to be cut from the same cloth as Elizabeth. If only Charles and Camilla would retire to the Waldorf Towers, as the Duke and Duchess of Windsor had the decency to do. Nothing makes me an expert on royalty, fond as I am of the royal we. I am, however, a student of human nature and recognize that the royals are a miserable lot, largely because they're so useless. People naturally want to strive. Without striving, idleness leads to trouble. Which brings us to Charles III, the most unhappy king because, at the end of the day, being king isn't a great job for him. Just a guess. As king, Charles has encountered a truth and a principle. The truth about life is that satisfaction comes from the journey, not the destination. The Peter Principle says that being good at one job doesn't mean that you'll be good at a higher one. Environmentalist was a palatable role for a polo-playing prince. He excelled at it and did valuable work. As a ribbon-cutting king, though, he's as stale as a leftover scone. To wit, Charles recently attended a plaque unveiling to mark the 50th anniversary of the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. A photo shows a rather wooden monarch, pinched and unsmiling as he meekly waves from the driver's cab of the Flying Scotsman, which was marking its 100th anniversary. When Queen Elizabeth performed similar functions, she carried an aura of duty. Charles' aura is that of a peevish old man who's just tasted a lemon. The sourness, dear Charles, is karma, and its name is Harry. If the fates are in charge, they've sent Harry to punish Charles in a purgatory of endless humiliation. The prince recently was in London to testify in court against the villainous media that led to his mother's death and that, he says, continue to badger him and his bride. Harry, who apparently loves to talk about himself, was in high dudgeon, as usual. The palace reportedly worried about what he might say under oath. Royals aren't supposed to speak under oath not because they might lie but because they might let slip a truth. Harry seems not to understand the leading role he plays in his own misery. He has engaged the media in a folie à deux, a shared madness in which neither can quit the other. But deep down, Harry's rage may be against Charles. On some level, he knows that his father helped along his mother's early death. But stiff upper lip, Charles. It's time for your birthday parade, where you get to dress up and ride a horse. On Saturday, the military extravaganza known as Trooping the Color will celebrate Charles' 75th birthday, the first of his reign, with hundreds of horses and soldiers performing battlefield drills to military music. The royal family will appear on a balcony, don't they always, and the Royal Air Force, to which Charles once belonged, will perform a flypast. It's bound to be a jolly time for all, except perhaps for Charles, who will still be Charles. We Americans may be a nation of miscreants, fools and sinners, but at least we don't pretend to thrones. For that, we have Britain's monarchy. And, thanking you for your indulgence, I feel much better now. Bring on the clowns. When Queen Elizabeth left, she took the happiness with her. As another American presidential race begins, I find myself missing the Queen, who was the last of a dying breed, royal or otherwise, and a monument to what we used to call class without fear of offense. Elizabeth's departure from her mortal coil has left a void. The upside is that it distracts from hating everyone in the American presidential queue. While I don't. If the United States can spy on China, why can't China spy on the US? Washington's badly frayed relations with China were just starting to recover from the Chinese spy balloon that traversed the United States in early February before being shot down over the Atlantic Ocean. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who had been forced to postpone his trip to Beijing because of all the hot air about the balloon flight, had finally rescheduled his visit for June 18. Then, last week, came word of a Chinese spy station in Cuba. In truth, there is nothing particularly scandalous about the latest revelations. It all began with a Wall Street Journal story on Thursday, Cuba to host secret Chinese spy base focusing on U.S. The article reported, citing anonymous U.S. officials familiar with highly classified intelligence, that China has agreed to pay cash-strapped Cuba several $billion to allow it to build the eavesdropping station and described this as a brash new geopolitical challenge by Beijing to the U.S. Cue the predictable outrage from Capitol Hill. We are deeply disturbed by reports that Havana and Beijing are working together to target the United States and our people, said a joint statement from the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark R. Warner, Democrat Virginia, and the vice chair, Marco Rubio, Republican Florida. We must be clear that it would be unacceptable for China to establish an intelligence facility within 100 miles of Florida and the United States. The chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Michael R. Turner, Republican Ohio, said in a tweet that he was deeply troubled by the report and added, if true, this would be yet another act of Chinese aggression. The number 3 House Republican, Elise Stefanik, New York, cited this as further evidence that President Biden has continually allowed Communist China to take advantage of his weak leadership and chip away at our national security. Then on Saturday, the White House said in a statement that China already had a spy base in Cuba. According to Biden administration officials, they inherited this issue from former President Donald Trump and have been working through diplomatic means to counter Chinese intelligence gathering in Cuba and elsewhere. China might be upgrading its intelligence presence in Cuba, but the presence itself isn't all that new, or shocking. The Soviet Union had its largest overseas listening post near Lourdes, Cuba, for decades. The United States was willing to risk war to remove Soviet nuclear missiles from Cuba but tolerated those signals collection efforts. That's because Washington has long recognized that nations have a right to spy on one another. Indeed, the United States